Nate Collins sat in silence, staring at the dimly lit apartment. The cold glow of the city seeped through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, harsh shadows across the modern yet lifeless decor. This was his home, his prison. For the past 7 years, the sound of heels clicking against marble broke the silence. Lauren strutted into the room with the confidence of someone who knew she owned it. Dressed in an elegant black dress, she was the picture of perfection, every detail meticulously crafted, just like the persona she had carefully built over the years. "I hope you're done sulking," she said with a smirk, tossing her designer purse onto the couch. Nate exhaled slowly, pressing his fingers to his temple. "I'm not sulking, Lauren. I'm thinking." She scoffed, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Oh, please, thinking about what? How you're going to survive without me?" She took a slow sip, her eyes watching him over the rim of the glass. Nate had once loved her fire. The way she could command a room, the way she walked through life like she was untouchable. But over time, that fire had turned against him, burning away any semblance of warmth between them. She had become his biggest critic, his greatest source of doubt, and tonight he had finally had enough. "I'm leaving," Nate said, his voice calm, almost too steady. Lauren let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, that's cute." She set her wine down and folded her arms. "You're serious?" He nodded. For a moment, something flickered in her expression. Surprise, maybe even disbelief. But then it vanished, replaced by condescension. "And where exactly do you think you'll go?" "You need me, Nate. You always have." That was the thing about Lauren. She believed herself invincible, irreplaceable. She had spent years drilling into his mind that he was nothing without her, that he owed his success, his lifestyle, his very existence to her. But that was a lie. Nate stood, his posture taller than it had been in years. "I've already packed my things. I'll be gone in the morning." Lauren's lips curled into a smirk. "You'll regret this. Mark my words, Nate. You'll be begging to come back." He took a step toward her, locking eyes with the woman he had once worshipped. "Pity," he murmured. "I was about to say the same thing." Her smirk faltered, but he didn't wait for a response. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving behind the life he had spent years suffocating in. Tomorrow his new life would begin, and he would make sure Lauren lived to regret underestimating him. Nate Collins awoke to the unfamiliar scent of fresh linen, crisp and untouched by the past. Sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains of his new apartment, casting warm streaks of gold across the modest yet inviting space. For the first time in years, he didn't wake up to the sharp aroma of Lauren's overpriced perfume or the cold tension that had settled into their home like an uninvited guest. He exhaled, stretching his arms above his head. This was real. He had done it. He had walked away. The night before had been the hardest. Leaving hadn't just been about packing boxes. It had been about untangling himself from years of manipulation, breaking the invisible chains Lauren had wrapped around his mind. She had built a world where he was small, where his successes were only possible because of her, where his failures were his alone. But as Nate stood in front of his bathroom mirror now, a different man looked back at him. His reflection was no longer shadowed by self-doubt. His dark eyes, once dulled by years of stress, held something he hadn't seen in a long time. Determination. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. An email. Subject: exciting opportunity. Nate opened it, scanning the contents. A colleague from years ago, someone who had always admired his strategic mind, was reaching out. A consulting position. A chance to start fresh. A slow smile crept onto his face. Lauren had always told him he wouldn't last without her, that he was nothing more than an extension of her success. But here was proof. Tangible, undeniable proof that he was more than she had allowed him to believe. By noon, Nate had secured his first freelance contract. It wasn't a multi-million-dollar deal, but it was a start. And that was enough. The next few weeks became a blur of rediscovery. Without Lauren's biting commentary in his ear, he found himself exploring old interests. Things he had abandoned because she had deemed them a waste of time. He hit the gym again, feeling his strength return not just to his body, but to his spirit. He picked up a book for pleasure, something he hadn't done in years. He even started cooking his own meals, realizing how much he enjoyed the process, the simple satisfaction of creating something for himself. And then there were the people. Lauren had made sure their social circle was built around her, surrounding them with people who catered to her ego. But without her, Nate found genuine connections rekindling. Old college friends, former colleagues who had always respected him, even the barista at the cafe down the street who greeted him each morning with a warm smile. One day, as he sat by the window of that cafe, laptop open, working on a new project, he noticed her, Claire Langley. She was seated a few tables away, absorbed in a book, her blonde hair falling over one shoulder as she absent-mindedly twirled a spoon in her coffee. There was something refreshing about her presence. Natural. Unforced. Unlike Lauren, who demanded attention, Claire seemed perfectly content in her own world. Their eyes met for a brief second, and she offered him a small, kind smile before returning to her book. Something stirred in Nate's chest. It wasn't an immediate infatuation, not a desperate need to fill the void Lauren had left behind. It was something quieter, something simpler. Oh, for the first time, Nate wasn't just surviving. He was living, and this was only the beginning. Lauren Collins had always loved the sound of her own heels clicking against polished marble. It was the sound of power, of presence. It was the sound of a woman who belonged in high-end restaurants, exclusive rooftop lounges, and perfectly curated social circles. But tonight, as she stepped into a dimly lit bar downtown, the sound was swallowed by the low hum of quiet conversations and the occasional clink of glasses. The place wasn't seedy. Lauren would never lower herself to that level, but it was a far cry from the extravagant venues she used to frequent. She hadn't set foot in her usual places in weeks because those places came with questions. Whereas, nay, you two were the perfect couple. What happened? Lauren had no patience for those conversations. Not when she was still trying to figure out the answer herself. At first, life without Nate had been exhilarating. She had thrown herself into the kind of social whirlwind she thrived on: late-night parties, weekend trips with girlfriends, and a steady stream of expensive distractions. She made sure to post about it all, carefully crafting an image of effortless joy. An image Nate would see. An image that would prove she didn't need him. And yet, as the weeks stretched on, a strange hollowness began creeping in. Lauren was no fool. She knew men, how they worked, what they wanted, and in the beginning they had swarmed. Flirty dinner dates, playful text exchanges, late-night invitations. But beneath the surface, there was something missing. None of them looked at her the way Nate once had, not with admiration, not with warmth. They looked at her the way a shopper looks at an expensive handbag, something to possess, something to show off. She told herself it didn't matter, that she had always been the one in control, that she was choosing this life, just as she had chosen to let Nate walk away. So why did she feel like she was the one who had been left behind? Lauren took a slow sip of her wine, her fingers tightening around the glass as she scrolled through her phone. Her social media was still pristine, flawlessly edited snapshots of a woman thriving, a woman untouched by regret. But when she switched to Nate's profile, her breath caught. A new post. At first, it was nothing alarming, just a casual shot of a book and a coffee cup at a local cafe. But then she noticed something, a reflection in the window, blonde hair, a woman sitting across from him. Lauren's grip on the glass tightened. She zoomed in, but the reflection was blurry. It didn't matter. The very fact that there was someone there was enough. He was moving on. Lauren wasn't sure what she expected, that Nate would spend months, maybe years, lost without her, that he would struggle, barely holding himself together until he finally admitted she was right and came crawling back, because that was what he was supposed to do. That was how this was supposed to play out. She was supposed to be the one who flourished. He was supposed to be the one who realized how much he needed her. Instead, he looked happy. A slow, burning frustration built in her chest. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. Nate had always been a man of routine, of comfort. He didn't adapt well to change. He wasn't supposed to thrive without her. Lauren finished her wine in a single swallow, barely tasting it. This was fine. Nate was just caught up in the illusion of freedom. He'd had a taste of something new, but eventually he would remember what he had walked away from. And when that moment came, she would be ready. Lauren wasn't one to beg, she wasn't one to chase, but she also wasn't one to lose. She ordered another glass of wine and leaned back in her chair, forcing a smirk onto her lips. If Nate thought he had won this little game, he was in for a surprise, because Lauren Collins never played fair. Nate had underestimated just how good it felt to be free. At first, he thought the change would be subtle, a shift in atmosphere, a quiet relief. A slow realization of what he had gained, but as the weeks passed, he understood something far deeper. He had been starving for years. Lauren had drained him, not all at once, not in an obvious way, but in small, deliberate cuts. A snide remark here, a dismissive laugh there, each one barely noticeable on its own, but over time they had worn him down, leaving him questioning his worth, his choices, his very identity. Now, without her, it was as if he had been given permission to breathe again. His mornings no longer started with the tension of waiting for Lauren's mood to dictate the day. He no longer spent hours analyzing her tone, wondering if he had done something to set her off. There were no more backhanded compliments, no more thinly veiled criticisms disguised as concern. Instead, there was peace. He woke up early, laced up his running shoes, and hit the pavement before the city was fully awake. His muscles ached in the best way, reminding him that he was alive. He worked late into the evening, not because he had to, but because he wanted to, because for the first time in years, he loved what he did again. And Claire was different. She didn't demand his attention. She didn't play games or expect him to prove himself worthy of her time. She was just there, steady, warm. Their conversations were effortless. She asked questions not to test him, but because she genuinely wanted to know the answers. She laughed easily without calculation. And when she listened, she truly listened, not waiting for her turn to speak, not calculating how she could twist his words into something useful for herself. With Claire, he felt seen. And more than that, he felt enough. Lauren, however, was unraveling. At first, she had played the part flawlessly, the carefree, thriving woman, the one who had shed the weight of a dead marriage and stepped into a brighter, better world. She had filled her days with luxury, with new faces, with an exhausting cycle of parties, brunches, and weekend getaways. But no matter how carefully she crafted the image, she couldn't silence the gnawing feeling inside her. She had expected Nate to struggle, to fall apart without her. Instead, he had flourished. That wasn't how this was supposed to go. The first time she saw him with Claire, it had been by accident. She had been walking through the city, her heels clicking against the pavement when she spotted them through the window of a small cafe. Nate was leaning back in his chair, smiling in a way she hadn't seen in years, relaxed, unburdened. The woman across from him, Claire, Lauren assumed, was laughing, her eyes bright with something genuine, something unforced. Lauren had stopped in her tracks, her stomach twisting in a way she refused to acknowledge. That should be me. The thought hit her with such force that she almost stumbled. She had left him. She had been the one to laugh at his dramatic declaration that he was done. She had been the one to say he would regret it. So why did it feel like she was the one who had lost? Lauren had always been able to control the narrative. She was the one who dictated how people saw her, how they thought about her. Even Nate, for years, had existed within the version of him that she had crafted. But now he was rewriting himself without her. And worse, he was happy. That night, Lauren found herself dialing his number before she could stop herself. She had told herself she wouldn't reach out, that she didn't need to, that he would come back to her when he realized how much he had lost. But now, doubt was creeping in. The call went to voicemail. She set her phone down and stared at it for several seconds before tossing it onto the couch beside her. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. She wouldn't let it be. Lauren had never considered herself desperate. She was too proud, too in control. But tonight, for the first time in her life, she felt something close to it, and she hated it. Lauren never imagined she'd be standing outside Nate's new apartment, heart hammering in her chest, hands trembling from a mixture of nerves and unspoken desperation. The building was nothing like the sleek modern high-rise they had shared. It wasn't impressive or extravagant. No luxury concierge waiting in the lobby, no valet parking. It was just a simple, well-kept apartment complex in a quiet part of the city. And yet it unsettled her more than any five-star hotel ever could, because this was where Nate had chosen to rebuild himself without her. Lauren had spent the last few weeks pretending she was fine, that her life was exactly as she had envisioned, but the truth was, something had shifted. She had lost control of the story. And for someone like Lauren, someone who had always dictated the terms of every relationship, every interaction, that was unbearable. So she had come here to fix things, to remind him what they had, to take back what was hers. She raised her hand to knock, hesitated, then forced herself to go through with it. A few seconds later, the door swung open. Nate stood before her wearing a fitted sweater and jeans, casual yet effortlessly put together. He looked different. Lighter, stronger, and there was something in his expression that made her stomach twist. He wasn't surprised to see her. He had expected this. "Lauren," he said simply, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. There was no warmth in his voice, but no hostility either. Just quiet patience, like a man indulging in inevitable moment. For the first time, she didn't know what to say. She had rehearsed a dozen different opening lines. Something cutting, something alluring, something that would put her back in control. But none of them seemed to fit now. Instead, she exhaled sharply and forced a small smile. "You look good." "So do you," he said, though his tone was polite rather than admiring. Lauren's confidence wavered. He wasn't making this easy. She hesitated, then let out a breathy laugh, the kind she used when trying to appear vulnerable. "God, I don't even know why I came here. Lauren," Nate's voice was calm, steady. "You know exactly why you came here." She stiffened. He had never spoken to her like this before. Not carefully, not methodically, not like he had already won. "I miss you," she said finally, the words escaping before she could swallow them down. For a brief second, something flickered in Nate's eyes, but it wasn't what she wanted. It wasn't regret. It wasn't longing. It was pity. "Lauren," he exhaled slowly, running a hand through his dark hair. "You don't miss me. You miss control." Her lips parted, stunned by his bluntness. "You don't like that I'm happy without you," he continued, "that I didn't crumble, that I didn't beg. You were so sure I'd fail without you, and now that I haven't. Now that I've actually built something better, it scares you." She shook her head, her throat tightening. "That's not true." "It is." His gaze was steady, unshaken. "And deep down, you know it." Lauren clenched her fists. "You're acting like what we had meant nothing." "It meant something," Nate admitted, "for a while, but it wasn't love, Lauren, not the kind that lasts. It was control, it was expectation, it was manipulation." She opened her mouth, ready to argue, but he cut her off with a final, quiet sentence. "And I don't want it anymore." Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Lauren felt it then, the reality she had refused to face. She had lost not just Nate, but the version of him she had sculpted, the man she had kept under her thumb for years. That man was gone, and in his place was someone she could no longer reach. Nate stepped back, placing a hand on the door. "You were right about one thing," he said, a small, almost sad smile tugging at his lips. Lauren's breath hitched. "Someone here does regret leaving," he murmured, "but it's not me." And with that, he closed the door, leaving Lauren alone, staring at the solid wood in front of her, the finality of it sinking in like a weight she would never be able to shake. For the first time in her life, she had nothing left to say.